Right. So Munch's Oddysee is the first actual 3D installments of the game series.
Yes.
Why did you feel at this point that it was time to jump into the third dimension?
Well, we were going from the PlayStation era into the PlayStation 2, or in our case, more specifically, the Xbox era. Mm-hmm. And so by that time, look, if you go back and you read, I don't even know if they're available today, but if you read all those articles that reviewed Abe's Oddysee, they all started with the opening line, although not in 3D, right? So it was always like disclaimed that it wasn't 3D first, which was kind of infuriating because you're like, why can't you rate it just on the premise of the quality of the game rather than whether it's 3D or not? And then they'd be rating some 3D game that looked like shit and saying, this is awesome graphics, and they'd be dinging us, which had better graphics for not being 3D. So it was kind of frustrating. But it was obvious that, games are going 3D. And by that time, you had Super Mario in 3D. Mm-hmm. And, that was a real game changer, right? And Microsoft was launching the Xbox, and they came to us and they said, we're focused on a casual gamers platform. Now, think back to history, right? So that's what they thought. They thought they were going to be the king of casual gamers. And they came to us and said, we'd like your next game, on the Xbox. And we were having troubles with the PS2. And, I can be really frank on what those troubles were. The troubles were it was an absolutely terrible development environment designed by a man who gave a shit about what the development community cared about. Right, and that's Kutaragi. So I'm not a fan of Kutaragi, obviously, and I never was. But PlayStation 1 was not so bad. PlayStation 2 was terrible for the development community. And the reason was really simple, is that you could not predict how much a game made. Now, unlike Kutaragi, we lived in a universe where we had to predict our costs, right? Unlike Kutaragi. Yeah. And so he started saying this shit like, well, this is good for the industry because it'll weed out the smart programmers from the bad. I mean, talk about a clueless perspective of what the rest of us were really dealing with. The guy was in La La Land, right? Because what happened with us and many others, except we were one of the few who got vocal, was that if we can't predict the cost of a game, then every nickel it goes over comes another pound out of our hide. Right. And that was the reality we were facing. And we would be asking Sony, how does this damn thing work? And they'd say, you'll figure it out.
Wow.
So not a happy period.
So translation, we don't know.
We don't know. We don't know. And, you can just go back in history and trace that because you go, how many first-party games released? Versus third-party games. And then you go, oh, gee, why is that? They couldn't even get their own in-house teams to deliver product, but, the rest of the world had to. So it was a difficult time.
And from what I've heard, like the early PlayStation 2 era, the documentation was horrible.
Well, it was almost non-existent, right? What you had was a chip designer who did not understand development at all. And he thought everyone should just get in line with the brilliance of his chip design. Well, welcome to the real world. How would Apple iTunes or, let me say, the App Store have taken off if they did something like that and just said, well, it's a bitch to develop for, but you'll figure it out someday. And by the way, whoever figures it out, good for you because you'll just prove you're smarter. So it was pretty offensive to everyone who was in the trench, who understood what was going on. It's one of the few arguments I ever got into. I won't say with who, but over whether or not Kutaragi should get the Lifetime Achievement Award. And I was like, damn no, and I lost that argument, obviously. But
This sounds like the Ron Swanson philosophy on capitalism. Capitalism is God's method of determining who is smart and who is poor.
Right. Yeah, so not a big fan, but obviously, the man made a big difference in the gaming industry. But the cost of it was that it sunk a lot of the development community. It forced them into acquisitions or out of business because it really, no matter how good you were, it was unpredictable because you were in the discovery process. You weren't given a system that, quite frankly, at the time, Microsoft was promising, look, we understand the challenges of development. We're trying to build a system for developers. And that was really a right message for developers at the time. And that's what gave the most hated brand in the world, Microsoft, a a leg up into the game community because the developers realized that they could make games in a more predictable way, which meant they could forecast the cost in a more predictable way, which meant maybe they'll stay in business.
Right. And it's also really important to remember that Microsoft is really hungry around this time. You know, PlayStation is the dominant system. Microsoft had jack shit.
Well, they were, they had the PC games going. They had flight simulators and things like that. And they had some successes on other IPs. But the fact was when we used to have these conversations, and the Xbox team at the time, we're talking about the creators, right? Ed Freeze and Seamus and Kevin Bucket and these guys, and they understood that the MS brand was the brand that consumers resented having to pay for.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if you think of it, you're like, I need to buy a new Windows edition. I know it's going to be miserable, but I need to pay $400 for it. Fuck, I mean, there's no other product in the world you feel that way about, except the ones that have a monopoly and force you into it. And they understood that.
I also have to say, I think this is, I'm chuckling internally here because, I've spent the last 20 years fixing busted Windows PCs. And I have to say, it's hilarious to hear that they were the serious ones about making costs more predictable, considering the fact that they themselves documented less than 20% of their own code.
Right. So there was a problem there. There was a little disjuncture between what they wanted to achieve and what history was saying they will do. And, and that's where we got on the bandwagon with, different people like Peter Molyneux and stuff. We traveled the world and we said, look, developers, this is a chance basically for us to be able to predict our projects, and the developers were like, what are you talking about? And we'd be like, no, think it through, and people agreed. And eventually, for the next 2 generations, they kicked some serious ass.
Right. So, well, was Microsoft really hands off with the game?
For us, it was not so bad. They were helpful. They sent down people. We were a release title. Right, and you got to imagine. I mean, like the audio chips weren't even working, for weeks until release. I mean, the windows were so tight, it was so crazy. Everyone was in such a frenzy. It was an exciting time, and the team at Microsoft, they really had that we're the underdog perspective, and that's really refreshing. Right, because then you have more open minds and you have more willing to take chances, and you have people that are being very aggressive, but they're trying to be smart at the same time. So it was exciting. But going back to your original question, I'm sorry, what was it again?
Well, was Microsoft really hands off? No.
Yes. So for us, they were creatively, except we got into trouble. And right after we signed the deal with them, coming off of PlayStation 2. Our internal team, our programmer team was saying, we'll solve all these problems if we just get over on the Microsoft. And we had horrible frame rate issues on the PS2 and a number of issues that we were having. And then they said, if we were just on the Xbox, this would get fixed. And then we get over to the Xbox and it's the same shit. So it was like, what are you talking? It was just a massive freak out. And so my partner, bless her, this is one of the strengths of putting in a smart woman in charge of things, because I don't know that many men would be good at what I'm going to describe. But what she did was she said, we got to call Microsoft and tell them exactly how fucked we are. And we were like, we just signed the deal. What are you kidding? And she was like, we need to call them now and tell them they fucked up and signed this deal, but they need to help us because we're not going to make a release. And it's like, okay, boss, we're following your lead. And she does that. And as she does that, Microsoft's coming back to us and saying, no, you're way ahead of the other teams. And she's going, well, then you're really screwed, right? Because I'm telling you, we're not going to make it. So she's demanding from them that if you're going to plan on us being there, you need to send down people here now. You need to help us fix these problems. And it wasn't that it was their fault. She was, taking accountability for it and saying it was our fault. But it was, one of those really scary moments where you're truly being honest to your money supply. And, Microsoft was never a big cash winner for us. It just allowed us to stay in business. So you're like, they're keeping us in business. We're going to tell them the truth. She's like, yes, of course. That's the only way to do it. And she actually pulled that off. Where they were telling her we were okay, and she's telling them that they're delusional. Right? If you can imagine. Yeah. And she gets them to send down their people, and they sent down a number of people, and they lived with us for months. And ultimately, quite frankly, if they had not, we would not have made release. Of course, we made release alongside Halo, and then the system that they were originally thinking might be given away, not paid for by the consumer, but free. So the system that had been contemplating being free was suddenly, what, $399? Was that the opening price? So basically, it was a hardcore gamers audience, right? And we were building a casual gamers game.
Right.
And we just got slaughtered by Halo, who did a great job, right? Like, Bungie did just a phenomenal job. So all kudos to them. But for us, we were trying to hold back. We were like, this game is not really ready. And we should wait a little while. Let the install base get a little more. Let us fix some things. And they wouldn't have it. They were convincing us that we were going to be a big hit out of the gate. You know, and no one can really predict that. So the rest is history.
Right. I mean, Munch's Oddysee was not the only victim of the hardcore Halo avalanche. I still mourn Rare.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I think back to Rare's like James Bond game, right? That was just such a trendsetter.
Yeah, GoldenEye, perfect.
GoldenEye, yeah.
But from what I understand, Microsoft just had this idea that there would be the casual family game studio. You know, under Nintendo, they did all sorts of games.
Well, they believed that, you know, and then what happened was with the success of the Xbox, which I think was largely attributed to Halo in many ways. I mean, there was a few other games that did quite well too. But, you know, when you look at Halo and you look at Gotham, they weren't looking at Gotham Racing as being this big success that it was. You know, they weren't thinking that, but it was. And what happened was then the management changed. And so Ed Freeze was out and new guys were in. And then they totally changed the tunes on, you know, the type of game company that they were going to be. And, you know, so then they started focusing on we're the hardcore gamers platform, which was, if they were going to release at that price point for the console, that was probably the right decision to make. You know, even though it wasn't a great decision for us, it was probably the right decision for them.
Right. Well,